is your first trip to, say, Europe and England. What has the reaction been like towards you?
You scared the birds away. Sometimes we forget that the people we absolutely idolise in this world didn't come out the womb like the way that they are. Believe it or not, even the greatest people that we put on pedestals and we call gods were also babies too, and were also people that weren't the famous people that we know today, because that was later on in their life. Now, that seems like a really, really obvious thing to say, but it's a very interesting point. Now, if you watch this channel, you know that my favourite band in the entire world is Van Halen, and I absolutely idolised David Lee Roth and Eddie Van Halen more than anyone else on the planet, pretty much. So I thought, why don't I do a massive, massive deep dive into my favourite band before they were my favourite band. So, let's get straight into this. Alexander Arthur Van Halen is where we start off. He was born May 8th, 1953. Quite a long time ago, no offence. 2 years later, January 26th, 1955, Edward Ludovic Van Halen was born. Now, they were the sons of Jan Van Halen and Eugenia Van Halen.
My father was a professional musician, classically trained on clarinet and saxophone, and he traveled the world making music, and he met my mother in Indonesia. Indonesia used to be a Dutch province, and after the war, they had a choice to either remain under their rule or move back to Holland. And they opted to move back to Holland, where life became a little rough because my mom became a second-class citizen.
And so the family decided, probably the best decision in music history, they had family members up near Pasadena, so they thought, let's move there too. And how they got their ticket to actually go to the US, because they weren't a rich family, was Jan played in the band that played on the boat.
We came to America on a boat, 9 days on the boat. He performed on the boat with the band, and that was our ticket over here. And one day he comes up to Alex and I and he goes, "Why did you guys play piano during the intermission?"
And so now, they've made it to the US, they're in California, we all know the great things that can happen in their future. But Jan Van Halen struggled to make a livable income on purely just music alone, so he took up work as a janitor. Because from what I know, California is a freaking expensive place to live.
He started gigging on the weekends because being a janitor and a maid and all that stuff, it didn't pay the rent. And we lived in one room, we slept in one bed in a house with two other families. So it was rough going.
On the more sad side, because Eddie and Alex, obviously English wasn't their first language, so they were put with a group of minority kids in their school, which made them experience a lot of racial bullying. As I said before, the kids continued to learn piano, and they got to the point where they were in competitions, and they would win all of the competitions. Now, in the 1960s, obviously there's a massive, massive boom in music, people like the Beatles and the British rock invasion in general. And the kids saw this and they thought, oh my god, this is freaking incredible, I want to do this for the rest of my life. Just like the kids nowadays, like me, who listen to Van Halen and think, oh my god, I want to do that for the rest of my life.
And then we discovered the Beatles and Dave Clark 5, and of course, like any kid, we wanted to rock and roll. I quit piano lessons and the contest circuit, so to speak, and said, I want to get myself a drum kit, because I like a song Glad All Over, boom, 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 by Dave Clark 5. And I wanted to play drums, so I got a paper out, bought a St. George drum kit for $125. My mom somehow had convinced my brother to still do something musically respectable, which is take flamenco guitar lessons.
And so he bought it and did his paper round to try and pay for it off. But while Eddie was gone, Alex thought, oh, this looks fun, why don't I go play the drums?
And then finally I just said, okay, he's just better than I am. I never wanted to play guitar, but I said, okay, go ahead, take my drums, I'll play your damn guitar.
I think that was the most successful fumble in all of music, because could you imagine Van Halen if Alex was a guitarist and Eddie was a drummer? But these kids played and played and played their off all day, every day. And they would literally lock themselves in their room and literally play for hours and hours and hours on end. Something that our attention spans in 2026 could never even come close to. But now the kids have realised they've definitely got something under their fingers, because they are very, very good at their instruments, and they're getting something which their dad always told them they used to try and strive for, and that is their own sound on their instruments. So Eddie and Alex, they formed their first ever band with 3 of their friends. And they called themselves the Broken Combs. The Broken Combs, what a name. And they would perform at the elementary school at lunchtimes, because, you know, they're cool like that.
I think when we played those first gigs as the Broken Combs, you know, and you see what kind of an effect you can have on people.
Who were the Broken Combs?
Oh, it was Ed and I and three other guys. So I was on saxophone.
We played at lunchtime at Hamilton Elementary School.
And we played at an assembly.
Out in the squad.
Well, also that assembly and some other stuff that we played at.
Yeah.
But the thing was that I know it sounds kind of shallow, but it's addicting to play in front of people that at the same time have that exchange between an audience and a performer.
It's great. It's unpredictable.
And of course the girls.
But as they played, they got better and better and better. They had a lot more musical influences, which is when Eddie's favourite band of all time, at least from what I've heard, came into his life, a band called Cream, who he cites as the reason why he wanted to do what he did. Eric Clapton was his absolute favourite guitarist of all time, and apparently Eric Clapton was a bit of a twat towards Eddie. But I won't get to that in this video. Eddie loved Cream so much that he learned every single song and every single solo, note for note. But they go through school and they're playing in bands and they're having a good time, and in 1971, Alex graduates from high school and then he starts taking composing and musical lessons in college, that being Pasadena City College. And while there, he met two very special people that are also in this story. The first one being a guy called Michael Anthony. Now, Michael Anthony, the guy that we know as the bassist of Van Halen, he got his interest in music from his dad, who was a trumpeter. The more you look into your favourite musicians, the more you realise how freaking diverse their lives are. But Michael Anthony, he grew up learning trumpet. Now, Michael Anthony was born June 20th, 1954, in Chicago, where he was raised. And Michael Anthony is also not a US dude. He came from Polish descent. Now, in 1966, the Anthony family moved to Arcadia, which is right next to Pasadena. And Michael continued his love for music by joining the marching band. But this is where his path kind of diverts a little, because he was massively into track and running and all of that exercise stuff that musicians never do because we never leave the house. And the thing about Michael Anthony is that he showed a lot of promise being a catcher in baseball, but he strived away from it because he wanted to follow his true passion. As you can guess, that's music. Now, Anthony took a lot of interest in playing the guitar when he was younger, but as most guitarists come to find, everybody plays guitar, everybody plays drums. So he thought, well, I'll get the most gigs if I'm the bassist, right? And so he got given a Fender Mustang by his friend, and he converted it into a bass by taking off the top two strings. How bassist is that? But eventually, obviously, he did get a bass and a proper bass amp. Now, Michael was also a massive fan of Cream, just like Eddie. But Michael Anthony's first band was called Poverty's Children. And fun fact about Michael Anthony is that he's left-handed, but he kind of forced himself to play right-handed. Anyways, we come to Michael Anthony's band Snake, which was a three-piece, where they play, Lynyrd Skynyrd and all of that lot. And a lot of the similar music that the Van Halens played in a band that they are in currently called Mammoth. And because they were playing similar music, they were playing in similar places too. And one night, the Van Halens band, with Eddie singing by the way, had their PA fail. Now, this broken equipment, again, is one of the very lucky things in their lives, because that's what led them to Michael Anthony. Because Michael Anthony's like, hey, Snake, we've got a PA, so we'll let you borrow that one. And that's how they met. So, 1974 comes around, Mark Stone, the bassist in Mammoth at the time, so Michael Anthony replaces him with his really, really high freaking vocals and his super cool, solid bass lines. And just like that, now you've got three members of Mammoth. But Mammoth is not quite what we know it today, both in name and in numbers of members. So, who do we get on to next? Only my favourite member of Van Halen, Mr. David Lee Roth. Now, David Lee Roth was born in Bloomington, Indiana, to an ophthalmologist called Nathan and a teacher called Sybil, and he had two sisters. Now, once again, Roth was not fully American. All of his grandparents came from Russia. So, if we circle back, Van Halen, two of the members are Dutch, one of the members is Polish, and the other one is Russian. And they're the greatest all-American band of all time. Pretty crazy. But David Lee Roth had a massive thing for film and radio, specifically the way that people talked on radio, with all their rhyming quips and all that cool stuff. But in David Lee Roth's teens, they moved to California, believe it or not, in Pasadena. Now, something that is very, very, very David Lee Roth is the fact that his parents sent him to a psychiatrist because he experienced something called monkey hour. Now, you may be thinking, what the hell is monkey hour? Now, Dave would have these massive, intense fits of hyperactivity, which he claimed was monkey hour. And because Roth was considered a troubled teen, he was sent to a horse ranch very often to deal with his delinquency, with other troubled teens, because they were trying to, build that sense of responsibility inside of him, which we all know how that turned out. But he ended up attending Pasadena City College, where he met, guess who? Alex Van Halen, as I said before. However, this is not where our story ends, because David Lee Roth, he doesn't want to be a part of Mammoth. Mammoth don't want him to be a part of Mammoth either. And so David Lee Roth was playing with the Red Bull Jets, and he was a lead singer. And this was more like an R&B, like chill-out blues kind of band. Nothing like what Van Halen was. But the thing about David Lee Roth is that he grew up with very, very, very rich parents, because if you want to make it in the music industry, you have to have rich parents. And so he had this really, really amazing PA system. For those of you who don't know, obviously the PA being the massive speakers that project your sound. And because he had such an amazing speaker system, everybody wanted to be David Lee Roth's friend. And Mammoth were one of the people that every now and then they would rent his PA system for $10 a night. Which, that's back in the 1970s, so that's this much in today's money. But David Lee Roth actually auditioned for Mammoth a couple times later on, and all of them kind of seemed to fail, because he wasn't the right fit in terms of style, in terms of his voice or his writing, loads of different reasons, but he never actually managed to get into Mammoth. Except in 1974, where he finally managed to push through and accept into Mammoth. Now, Eddie very funnily says that he did this because he was tired of paying to use his PA, and they thought, oh, if Roth's in the band, then we don't have to pay to use his PA, so we can just play. So, now you've got a group of 4 guys, the lineup that we know today, the true Van Halen, and they're currently under the name Mammoth. Now, we don't know the band as Mammoth now, so how did they get the name Van Halen? Now, we're still in 1974, and Van Halen, Mammoth, think, okay, we need like a really, really catchy name. And David Lee Roth is credited for saying, Van Halen, like your guys' last name, it should be that. And the brothers were like, whoa, no, that's silly. We don't want that. And David Lee Roth kind of convinced him and said, Van Halen, it's not like a rock kind of band name. It's like a fine art kind of thing, like you said about the Picasso brothers. But Van Halen, it's prestige, you know. It's that powerful, and like it could mean anything to like an American ear. And so eventually they folded and they chose the name Van Halen. And they started gigging around, and I would love to talk about all the different shenanigans that happened, up from when they first started playing as Van Halen up to when they recorded their first album. But that's an entirely different video, because I could talk about that for hours, and we all know I shouldn't be talking for hours. But to keep it short, they went round gigging as Van Halen for a while, until they met a guy called Gene Simmons. Now, do you recognise the name Gene Simmons? You probably should. It's the bassist, an absolute money-hungry man from Kiss.
I discovered Van Halen at the Starwood. They were opening up for a group called The Boys, who I was really there to see. And as soon as I saw Van Halen, I went backstage and cornered the guys. So I offered to fly them to New York to Electric Lady Studios and produce their demo, which I did, 15 songs. And I brought them in to Bill Aucoin, our then manager, and the rest of the band. And I said, let's do the smart thing. Let's take a new band under our wing. This is going to be the next big American band. Nobody else believed it. So I tore up the contract and I said, guys, love you. I'm a big fan. Go and get them. Within 2 or 3 weeks, they got a deal at Warner Brothers, and the rest is history.
Fortunately, about a year later, in 1977, the Warner Brothers, they saw these demos of Van Halen and thought, oh my freaking god, what the hell is this? And so on the spot, they offered Van Halen a contract to record a full-length album. The full-length album that we know today as Van Halen 1, the debut of the most incredible band to have ever lived. And that's history. From then on, they went into a bunch of debt with this because the absolute recording industry is terrible, and they recorded many more albums, and then David Lee Roth ended up leaving in 1985 to pursue amazing solo career, which I talk about fully in a video that you should go watch next. So go have a great day, and I'll see you next time. So go listen to some Van Halen, because can't go wrong with them. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye, you beautiful weirdos. Oh god, I'm wearing tight jeans. Gah! Yeah. Bye.